Good morning, everyone. We welcome you to our Sunday morning roundtable discussion. Today is Sunday, August 18th, 2019. We are recording from the Plainfield Church Independent, Plainfield, New Jersey, the United States of America, and we welcome you all in today. And we will start with our morning prayer.
Mrs. Eddy's prayer from page 171 of 6 Days of Revelation by Richard Oakes. O my God, I offer as a consecrated gift upon thine altar a heart dedicated to thy service, lips speaking only words of charity, love, and truth, thoughts striving to be only the true thoughts of the mind of God. Help me to endure unto the end, strong in the faith, powerful in the truth, all the influence that I can bring to bear, all the force of tongue or pen that is mine, I offer in thy service. May heaven help, consecrate, and accept.
Thank you. All right, the watching point this morning, Linda.
Okay. Watch number 304. Watch lest, after you come into Christian Science, you retain the old concept of a destiny that is subject to chance and change. The destiny of a flower is subject to every wind and storm that comes until it's transplanted into a hothouse. There it develops under ideal conditions and is safe from depredation. When we become Christian Scientists, we are transplanted into God's hothouse. There we are under his perpetual care and no longer subject to chance and change. We are governed by the law that all things work together for good because we love God. End quote.
Thank you. Very perfect watching point for this week's lesson, the story of Ruth. So any comments on that? We're going to talk more about it as we get deeper into the lesson.
I'd like to be in God's hothouse.
Yeah, and, naming the name, Mrs. Eddy has said it when we're born again, really, when we name the name Christian Science and decide to follow along that path, when we earnestly mean it, not just glibly, but earnestly mean it. And in that way, we do find our divine destiny, as Ruth did. So, and as I said, we'll talk more about that as we get into that story. Anyone else?
And people are attracted to it because they feel the safety of it, don't they?
Sure.
Whether it's a healing of a disease or a healing of a empty life, or when you enter into God's hothouse, you'll feel a safety that you can't ever feel any other way.
Yeah, we often hear on just thank God for science. I don't know what I'd do without science. Well, that's sort of what it means. Go ahead, Florence.
I think to me it also means keeping yourself still in the secret place of the Most High, where your true identity can never be changed. And the more we stay there, the more we discover what he has made us to be and not believe in all these other challenges that come trying to tell us what we are not.
Yes, absolutely.
I'd like to say about science not being chance or anything like that. The Christianity that I grew up with in California just made it seem as though if you pray, something might happen. Don't know, kind of a lottery. And then later on, I sort of had a glancing blow with atheism. That's all about things by chance. That of course, doesn't do anything good for me either. So coming here and learning this and learning that I can prove that things are not because of one thing.
Louder, Jeremy, please.
Oh, okay, sorry. Part of it is I've working to take those words like chance and fortune and unfortunate and stuff like that out of my vocabulary has helped me to be like really mindful that I'm not not attributing anything to any other cause but God.
Did you get that, Sharon?
Yes, thank you.
And this is why, as scientists, we have nothing to do with gambling and other chance-taking, risk-taking, thinking that somehow good will happen in that way. We have nothing to do with it. And it's gotten very aggressive now. You can even get gambling apps and other things because we know that gambling and risk and chances have nothing to do with Christian Science and a life led in those footsteps.
Well, and that goes back to what Florence was mentioning. Once we step into God's hothouse and feel the safety, we also begin to learn the requirements to be able to stay there. And there's a moral code that is required for us to be able to stay there.
Yeah, and if we follow that moral code, then we are out of his secret place of the Most High. Who is speaking?
I was going to say that I really appreciate the obedience that I learned. That was the one thing missing from my earlier decades in Christian Science was I never knew that, kind of stupidly, that I was supposed to be obedient to God's laws. Somehow that just wasn't drummed into me. And so that obedience brings freedom and safety. And, ironically, you think that, if I obey all of these laws, I'm going to lose my freedom. Well, it's just the opposite. And that's the wonderful thing you learn. And that's where there's no more what ifs. Well, what if this? And what if that? And my whole future is open, and it's just the blowing winds will, bring whatever happens, and what if. And just, there's none of that anymore, because once you know that you're in the hothouse, which, or you're underneath the wings of God because you are keeping your nose clean, so to speak, it just brings us reassurance and the safety of the narrow way.
Thank you very much. So our subject today is soul. And before we get into too much, I just want to go over, because I often hear people don't understand soul, the synonym. It's one of my very, very favorites, and it's one that you should understand and love too. We go over it each time there's a subject on soul, but we will go over it again. And Jeremy, I'll have you read from what you wrote on the forum post. 1937, Bicknell Young. This is by far my favorite in-depth article about soul.
Soul is the spontaneous nature of man, the epitome of natural knowing. Soul is true inspiration. As you advance in the science of soul, you will see beauty where you never saw it before. A Christian scientist attains his dominion in the proportion that he seeks not the image and likeness, but the original. In that original, which is in principle, spirit, soul, resides and shines in full effulgence, all comeliness, originality, receptivity, beauty, and joy.
Thank you. Bicknell Young goes on in that article. The one who is demonstrating soul will not seek to do it, but the beauty of his soul will be manifested in his surroundings. Soul particularly stands for the things that beautify experience and make life more enjoyable. Soul is a word that signifies beauty, happiness, harmony, peace, and so on. Mind signifies reasoning faculties. Soul is the spontaneity of knowing without process. Soul is the isness of all. Soul is the sense of all beauty, the principle, the activity, the law of all that is beautiful. It is the impulsion of all true expression. Man is a state of revelation, spontaneously showing forth soul. And this goes on for a couple of pages, mainly addressing beauty and joy, which are certainly attributes of soul. And I believe that Bicknell Young loved and spoke about soul as much as he did because he was a musician, as was his wife, before coming to science. And don't we all talk about, someone plays with soul or even a soulful expression? It does have to do with the beauty of love and of life. And we see it all around us. And that is soul. And it is true, as our thought ascends, everything around us becomes more beautiful. Bicknell Young says there won't be one ugly thing in the kingdom of heaven, because beauty is an attribute of soul, which is a synonym of God. So learn to love and use and be aware of this synonym always. Is also connected with joy. The soul of music is very often the joy of music, the beauty of music. It uplifts the spirit.
I think it...
Well, go ahead.
It's interesting that when we lose the sense, or if we don't know it, we can also be in a beautiful place and not even see it at all. I remember visiting patient, and when I got there, it was nothing. I just thought everything was so beautiful, and here she was in the midst of it all, so depressed, so desperate, and I'm like, how can this be? But later on, in retrospect, I understand what was happening. When you really lose the sense of soul, when you really don't see who you are, everything, all the negatives is what's dominating your thinking, you lose sight of what's around you.
That is so very true. Thank you.
I remember for a long time having a difficult time kind of understanding what soul was. And, I could understand a little bit anyway of, principle being law or life, but we are conscious of being alive. Truth, truth is truth. You can't be this, get by. But soul was difficult for me. And it took me a while to realize that the reason soul was difficult for me was because I was so materially minded. Soul is the expression of spirit. And we can't perceive soul other than through our spiritual sense. And I realized, and this was a great awakening for me, that only spiritually minded people can experience the beauty and joy of soul. As I cultivated spiritual sense, I began to see more beauty and feel more joy around me. And that is how I think of soul.
I appreciate that. And I found, Craig, that as I realized that stop spending much time on thinking of the negative and more in the reality of good, as I learned in Christian Science, I could better appreciate soul. It didn't have a darkened sense of things.
Hey, Craig.
Yeah, because soul is correct, positive, beautiful sense of things, which is the truth about God's.
No, I also love those pages in Science and Health, 244 to 248, which deal with age and also beauty. Mrs. Eddy says, beauty as well as truth is eternal, but the beauty of material things passes away, fading and fleeting as mortal belief. Immortality, exempt from age or decay, has a glory of its own, the radiance of soul. Immortal men and women are models of spiritual sense, drawn by perfect mind and reflecting those higher conceptions of loveliness which transcend all material sense. It goes on. It's just beautiful, those pages, but at the bottom of the page she says, the recipe for beauty is to have less illusion and more soul, to retreat from the belief of pain or pleasure in the body into the unchanging calm and glorious freedom of spiritual harmony. And that's what Gary was talking about. But what does it mean to have less illusion and more soul?
Well, I really like that because it's Bicknell Young said about soul being the original. So anything that's not of the original, certainly.
Louder, Jeremy.
Sorry, anything that's not of the original is certainly illusion. Unreal.
Thank you.
It's how we perceive things, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Do we see the spiritual reality of all things? Do we see their spiritual purpose? Or do we just see the surface material appearance of things? The human mind would say, the material appearance is what's real. God says, no. That is the illusion. It is the spiritual purpose and intent that is the reality.
Thank you. And she also says a friend can never seem less than beautiful and lovely, because we see in our friends that the beauty of soul, that inner beauty that shines forth, that everyone is capable of expressing and having.
Just thinking of Herbert Eustace talked about matter as shadow, and looking from that shadow back to substance.
So, yes, thank you. So learn to love and think about this synonym. It's just all around us, and we should love it and be aware of the beauty of God's creation. I often think of that, can't quote it exactly, where Mrs. Eddy says something about not even a leaf comes out of its cloistered cell. It's the power of God behind all the beauty everywhere, just infinite. And I look around, I think of all the leaves on the trees, there are millions of them. And the flowers, everything, it's just amazing how beautiful God's universe is. Even in so-called material terms, and as we know, there's no such thing. There's just the one creation of God. So, okay, the golden text, Psalm 34. The Lord redeemeth the soul of his servants, and none of them that trust in him shall be desolate. Florence, you wrote about that. Redeemeth.
Yes, redeemeth from Webster, 1828, is to purchase back, to ransom, to liberate. I like this one. It says to regain possession of a thing alienated by repaying the value of it to the possessor. Just love the idea of our true identity being lost or obscured in our troubles, and that our Redeemer, our Father, Mother, God, always present to show us who we are. And I say that our faith in Him is what gives us that redeeming grace. Let's keep seeking and cultivating stronger faith in God so we may know our true identity. And this beautiful promise where she says, take heart, dear sufferer, for this reality of being will surely appear sometime and in some way. There will be no more pain, and all tears will be wiped away. When you read this, remember Jesus' words, the kingdom of God is within you. This spiritual consciousness is therefore a present possibility. That just struck me in the lesson.
Thank you. It is so wonderful to remind us ourselves of this wonderful truth. It is the truth of our being. John was here when he saw the New Jerusalem. And as our thought ascends and lifts, we will see more and more of it. And that includes infinite supply, health, joy, peace, all good things. And they can't be held back. Thank you, Florence.
And the word desolate here I thought was worth thinking about. The use here, what is desolation? It's being without comfort, being without guidance, without direction. It's like feeling lost, alone. Not a good feeling, is it?
Total despair.
Despair, yes. And, Mrs. Eddy tells us that, the cause of disease is sin or fear. Sin and fear are really desolate states.
Ignorance.
Yeah. But trusting in the Lord removes the fear, removes the sin, removes the ignorance. It gives us guidance. It gives us companionship. And you can't ever be alone when you're with God.
It gives us purpose.
Yeah. This is a powerful statement of scientific fact.
And I'm sure all of us have felt desolate at times, totally desolate, without comfort, lost, not knowing which way to go. And this is when you have to bring in the dictum, Mrs. Eddy calls it the dictum of the Bible, and that is all things work together for good to them that love God, to them that are called according to His purpose. And what is a dictum?
A type of law?
Yes. Proclamation or a short statement that expresses a general truth or principle. Yes, a law. So this is a law, a principle of the Bible. And think of it. Isn't it wonderful that God is telling us this? He's saying it through the Apostle Paul, but we don't have to wonder. So when we're in the middle of being desolate, take this truth and know that all things are going to work together for your good. as long as you keep yourself in that love of God, if you love him and are working according to his purpose. This was in another lesson a few weeks ago, but it certainly is. Ruth is a wonderful example of this, isn't she?
Yeah, loyalty.
Loyalty. You know, that's an attribute that sometimes isn't well appreciated these days, it would seem, to have a loyalty. And yes, our loyalty is to God. But, you know, God created everyone. If we feel some loyalty to a person, it should be because we are seeing God in that person, and therefore we're going to be loyal to it. It's faithfulness. This is what Ruth did. And it would have been much easier not to. I thought, you know, the hymn, Mrs. Eddy's hymn, it matters not what be thy lot. So what?
Love doth guide.
Doth guide. For storm or shine, pure peace is thine, whate'er betide. If love, if you are following love, and even if it is a human sense of love, and even if it's at this point a human sense of loyalty, if you're doing the best that you know how, God will lead you out of the worst, most difficult situations. This is a dictum, a promise from him. Now, I think of Jeremy. He had 2 wives, X1 and X2, I call them.
I was like, wait.
He is many times to me, what?
Oh, I would not have left them if they didn't tell me to leave. I believe firmly in being loyal to that situation. But I'm so grateful to come here and learn what loyalty is really supposed to be. Like, I think of Mrs. Eddy saying, follow me as far as I follow Christ. And it's almost like where the right loyalty is being loyalty to the loyalty of Christ.
Thank you, yes. And so X1 and X2, both on us the same April day, but different years.
Yes.
The same April day and different years. Him out of the house. Told him to get out and leave.
And they moved me closer to here. So.
And they moved him closer to here.
And to God.
And to God. And so all things work together for good, even through that terrible time where he was ready to commit suicide the second time when it happened. He was like, what the heck? But he kept going, and God saw him through. And now X1 and X2, they're not doing so great. Because that's how it is. They probably both wished he'd come back into their lives, but that ain't happening. So it worked together for good. And he didn't know anything about science at that time. He was just doing the best he could. And he was loyal in a human way. Now he's learned to be loyal in a divine way.
Even to the point, I didn't know anything about Christian Science to the point when I got here, I didn't know why Mary wanted me to call her every day. I didn't know she was a practitioner. And I also didn't know what the golden text was.
He said, what's the golden text? He didn't know anything about the science. But now look at him. But God's hand was on him because he was a good man doing the best he knew how. Now, I heard a story recently about someone, he'd gone to a play, and he told his friend, oh my gosh, this is just the best play ever. It's so inspirational. It's just wonderful. And so his friend went to the play, and when he came back, his friend that had seen the play said, well, how did you like it? Wasn't it wonderful? And the guy said, it was terrible.
Yeah.
Says the child is kidnapped. The husband loses his job. The wife is in the hospital. What are you talking about? So the original guy who had told him to go to the play, he said, well, did you stay till the end? And he said, no, I was so depressed I left during the middle. The guy said, well, you had to stay to the end. Everything works out in the end. It's an amazing story. So sometimes we have to be patient with ourselves when we are in the middle of something and say, oh, man, this is just a, bust. Nothing's working out. You haven't gotten to the end yet. Have a little patience. A dictum, a promise from God.
Go not back to error, nor be a sluggard in the race.
Exactly. Yes. Thank you.
Mrs. Eddy.
Yes. And then in Science and Health, where she says, sorrow has its reward. It never leaves us where it found us. The furnace separates the gold from the dross. The precious metal may be graven with the image of God. The cup our Father hath given, shall we not drink it and learn the lessons he teaches? And then it goes on. This is from the chapter in marriage, about when the storm shrieks and all that, you on. And the sun will eventually come out. And I thought it was so interesting that she says in this lesson, Mrs. Eddy, sorrow is salutary. And also the pains of sense are salutary. What does salutary mean?
Health-giving.
Thank you. Health-giving. Health-giving.
Beneficial.
Wholesome. Think about it. Sorrow is wholesome and healthful, health-giving. The pains of sense are wholesome and health-giving. Is that how you view them?
That's what we're taught to see everything as a blessing. It will bless me in the end.
Yes. I think it's quite significant that she says it twice. Things you would not usually describe as salutary. She's telling us it is sorrow and the pains of sense. And then she says, if they wrench away false, pleasurable beliefs and transplant the affections from sense to soul, where the creations are good, rejoicing the heart. Such is the sword of science with which truth decapitates error, materiality giving place to man's higher individuality and destiny. This is what we're getting at. Long time ago I'd read outside the city of Jerusalem there's a place called Gehenna. And it's a place where all the refuge goes, where all the waste things go, the things that cease to serve a purpose. And another word for Gehenna is hell. That struck me at the time because I felt like I was in hell. So if you feel like you're in hell, you got to keep working to come out of it and find out your purpose, your divine destiny, as Ruth did. It's most important. So, and one other point that I thought was very important is spiritual development germinates not from seeds sown in the soil of material hopes, but when these decay, love propagates anew the higher joys of spirit, which have no taint of earth. Each successive stage of experience unfolds new views of divine goodness and love. Now, what is this germinates not from seeds sown in the soil of material hopes? What's that all about?
You can't find it in the human mind. That's the desolation. You have to find it by dropping that. It kind of made me think of, you had said something, and I didn't get the whole quote, but the words without process and going through all this human reasoning, that's your desolation. And you just humbly trust God then you find your way.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, wanting to go to a different school, wanting a better job, wanting more money, wanting a bigger house, wanting does not produce spiritual growth.
Thank you very much. Those are the seeds sown in the soil of material hopes. List that you have, I want list. Sometimes things work to the very opposite of what you think you want, to maybe your earthly good. They'll go in the exact opposite, and you're, full of, oh, drats. Nothing's working out. God's forgiven me. Well, maybe that wasn't intended for it to be, because it doesn't propagate anew your spiritual growth. It has to be your spiritual growth. God doesn't give 2 cents about your earthly hopes. I hope you understand that.
He has a better plan, right?
He has a much better plan. You cling on to those earthly hopes and grounds and complain because you don't get into that certain college or marry that certain man or live in that certain house or drive that certain car or whatever else your human hopes are. Well, you're just going to be in for a lot of frustration and vexation of spirit.
I think that's why we have to be honest when we say we've given it all to God for His plan to unfold.
Amen.
That is wonderful, because so many times I've given it all to God. I don't know what the matter is going on. That was
a prayer that I has helped me is just to say, "Dear God, let me be a blessing," and it kind of lets Him unfold things better without me getting in the way, and the things have been working out.
Thank you so much. That goes back to it matters not what be thy lot. So love has to be the divine love, no, not human do-goody running around here and there trying to please people, but God leading. And these are the ways that we find our destiny, by letting love guide. So let's go into that story of Ruth. Before I do that, I just did want to mention that most of you probably have seen Parthen's post, the beautiful story of the woman who was in despair and despondency and thinking she had nothing but a couple of hot dogs to feed her and her son for Thanksgiving. And then it was an angel visitant that came and spread out a wonderful table, encouraged her, blessed her so. And there was no human explanation for it, because the next day there was no sign that person existed. The place where she went was empty, the apartment. And later that woman became a great help to others who were despairing and despondent because of that angel visitant.
That's a beautiful story.
It's so beautiful.
Yeah, if you haven't seen it, it's worth it. It's short, but definitely worth it.
So, Linda, you want to tell us about the story of Ruth?
Yeah, I read a little bit about it. It sounded like it was, they believe it took during the time there was religious apostasy and political disorganization and social chaos. I know there was famine, but most of the famine was caused because people had come in at different groups and taken away all the stuff from the Israelites. And so they were robbed, and they would come right when all the, I guess, the plants and stuff had been ready to be harvested. Thank you. And took everything. And they did that over several times. And so they were kind of spread out. And that's why Ruth was with her husband in another place, is because they needed food. And so I realized they're a bit like the remnant. And she had heard that there had been a turnaround, Ruth, and so she wanted to go back. And to me, that was just her love for God, really. And so that also then Naomi knew through Ruth. Naomi wanted to go back and Ruth wanted to follow her. And I think Naomi must have had a beautiful expression of reverence for God for Ruth to be attracted to it. And so I realized when I read this that this was a good example of what you guys talk about, of choosing between your human destiny and divine destiny, because it could have been easy for Ruth to just go home to what she knew. She had been probably raised with pagan thinking, multiple gods, but she chose to go, and it was just to look like it would have been in a place that people didn't know her, maybe wouldn't have been friendly toward her, because they had been a little bit of enemies, those two countries, Moab. And she went without money or any plan. She had no idea what she was getting, and I don't think she even thought she was going to be getting anything. She just wanted to know God more and be with Naomi, who was, to me, sort of like your church, where you go where the people of God are, and with the highest sense of the worship of the God that's around. And so it was beautiful to me that she worked hard, and it was like a testing time, just like you guys talked about at the last roundtable. And she just kept on and just went forward. And then she was blessed in the end, but that wasn't her goal.
No, it was not her goal. She just followed love. It mattered not what was her lot, but love led her, and loyalty. And often the question to ask is whatever you want to do, is this going to bring me closer to God or farther from it? Simple question, and it'll be plain. The lesson talks about things being plain. Show me thy ways, O Lord. Teach me thy paths. He will teach you his path and show you which way to go and how to find this divine destiny so you're not feeling so useless. And in those days, for Naomi's son to marry a Moabite, that was a sin. And so, sometimes something like that will happen. I mean, Naomi could have said, oh my gosh, look what my son did. This is terrible. He married the wrong person. This is hell. What's going to happen? It's just awful, awful, awful. Well, look what Ruth was the one who did. God doesn't know all this limitations we put on people by color, race, or whatever else. You've got to trust his plan. Trust his disposal of events. Ruth was the one to Obed, father of Jesse, the father of David. Thank you, Linda. Anyone else?
I thought Ruth was a perfect example of being selfless. She didn't think of herself at all. I thought that was so clear and a good lesson.
It shows
yes.
It shows the kind of loyalty Mrs. Eddy had for, just pursuing her love, which it sounds from her history that she's always had this love for God, even as a child, and she followed it no matter what, even when family deserted her and gave her all those ultimatums. Nothing swayed her. It's just beautiful sense of loyalty.
Yes, thank you. You see, and in these examples, you can't fake this. It was deep in their souls, so to speak, in their souls, to do the right thing. They couldn't do otherwise, but they had that spiritual sense that was leading them. They weren't materialistic. They didn't think, well, what's in it for me? Because when you think that, you're in trouble.
She certainly didn't have many, if any, seeds growing from material hopes in that situation. They must have totally trusted in God because they didn't, being women, coming back, great
loved her mother-in-law, and that love was evident. And she did her nearest sense of right. And if you always do that, your nearest sense of right, not what other people are telling you to do, or not what's most convenient and best for you, but as Sharon said, the unself desire, it matters not what be thy lot, so love doth guide. It'll always come together for good. And if you're in the middle of it, as I said, just keep going.
I also think what Ruth saw was that made her to follow Naomi. It is something that Jesus' disciples saw in him that made them to give up almost their wealth, business, almost everything they have to follow Christ, to most of them to the end. And I think we today, we have the same obligation to see that in Mrs. Eddy. As she said, follow me as long as I follow Christ. I mean, we have that obligation to have that sense of soul, to feel the obligation to follow her, just as the disciples saw in Jesus. If we don't see that in Mrs. Eddy today, to follow her that long, I think it will be a failure to our part.
That's right.
Thank you,
Benjamin. And that was the same thing that led you
yes,
to leave your home in Africa and come to this church and stay here.
I think so.
Was it ever? Never had been here before, and talk about trust. And he went and he never looked back. It was God's directing, and he's spiritually minded. It wasn't materialistic. Rise up and follow him. Hymn number 49. We rise up, as Benjamin was saying, the disciples left everything to follow the Christ. They knew it was the pearl of great price. How many people are willing to do that today? Seriously. That's why the fewness and faithfulness of its followers, not very many people are willing to drop everything for this cause, even in a small degree. So we're grateful for those of you that do. Mrs. Evans always liked to talk about using the 2x4. And I finally read the story about the 2x4, which was about a farmer who was watching this man trying to get a donkey to go somewhere, and the man was pulling and doing all this shoving, and the donkey would not budge. So finally the farmer who owned the donkey, I think, said, well, come here, I'll show you how it's done. So he picked up a 2x4 and he smacked the donkey on the head. Now, I'm not necessarily promoting this, but it makes a point. So the donkey looked stunned and went very obediently after the farmer. So, and then the story makes a point. Sometimes we need a 2x4 or a 4x8.
Or the entire house falling on you.
Or the entire house falling on you. In order to get your attention.
To wake you up out of the sleepy, willful stupor.
Yes.
That is preventing you from growing.
And finding your divine destiny. So don't argue about it or be dismayed if you're in a problem. And don't say, as Florence said so well, I've given everything to God. Obviously, you haven't. Big Nell Young says we get in a rut and keep on rutting. And sometimes it's also called self-mesmerism. We've convinced ourselves we've done everything, absolutely everything. And all that is self-mesmerism. Take a good look. Take a really good look. To look inside and see what we honestly are, Mrs. Eddy says in the chapter on prayer. Where are you really? And that's why you have to get in your closet and shut the door to find that answer to that question. Because otherwise your voice is just going to always be saying, I'm doing it, I'm doing everything, I'm doing it, yeah, man, I've given it all, I am. Take a good look and be honest, brutally honest with yourself. And in that way you can find, what does Mrs. Eddy say, who and what you honestly are. And then start from there. This isn't for condemnation. Not so you go into a ball of condemnation. This is, okay, I have more to do. I'll be humble and I'll take a day at a time and learn more. So, okay, anyone else? Mary is pointing to me that it's time to end. So I think we're just going to end on this beautiful hymn, 399.
Hymn 399. Ye timid saints, fresh courage take. The clouds ye so much dread are big with mercy, and will break in blessings on your head. His mighty purpose ripens fast, unfolding every hour. The bud may have a bitter taste, but sweet will be the flower. Blind unbelief is sure to err and scan his work in vain. God is his own interpreter, and he will make it plain.
Thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.